You started. Oh God.
Yes.
Let me quickly put my pants on. Woo. Here we go.
I always catch that last movement of your dance, and thank you very much for showing it, actually. I know that there are people out there who want to see it, and to whom I say good morning. And thank you very much for joining us on this Sunday morning. This is March the 16th, 2025, and we are once again broadcasting from Tokyo and Katsuyama. So thank you very much, Timothy, for being there for us, for everybody, because I'm sure that everybody is looking forward to hear what you can tell us about the latest in Japanese politics. I'm not going to keep anybody waiting anymore, so it's over to you.
Save your voice, Maya. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And as Maya said, it's March 16th. Tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And this is our 214th episode together, Maya.
It is, yes.
I want to say thank you to everybody that's listening in either directly live or later on YouTube or even in Clubhouse. The Clubhouse audience has diminished somewhat, though, hasn't it, Maya?
It has, yes. For the past 1 year, I think that Clubhouse became a little bit more difficult to navigate, and many of our listeners there moved over to YouTube or LinkedIn. Some of them are on Facebook as well. Yes.
Right. So once again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Today, I am broadcasting from my second studio, which is in the backseat of my shabby automobile. I can't do it from Grimm's, the good ship Grimm's, just because the weather is so inclement and the Wi-Fi is not strong there. So I had to jump in the car and drive 500 meters away so that I can get Wi-Fi and be protected from the elements. But thank you very much for joining us. If you are interested in, being better connected, please reach out to me on Facebook, where I talk a little bit more about my personal life, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But LinkedIn is the place where we exchange thoughts and what's going on. We upload the synopsis every week, and I'm very grateful for everybody, tuning in and sending us likes and encouraging us like that. But here are the top line items, Maya, for this last week. Prime Minister Ishiba is in a bit of a soup. He is facing probably his hugest challenge since he took over as prime minister, and it looks like the die might be cast sooner rather than later. And what I mean by that, I'll get into it in the details of the regular briefing. But he's got some serious concerns going on, and even rebellious voices within the LDP itself, to say nothing about Komeito. George Glass is Donald Trump's pick to become ambassador to Japan. He's going through confirmation hearings right now, Maya, and it looks like he will sail through. He was initially considered to be ambassador to Japan. Bill Haggerty swooped in and took that position in the first Trump administration, and George Glass was sent to Portugal to be their ambassador. So he is a seasoned diplomat, and it looks like his confirmation hearing will go through, and he will be in position probably within the next 2 months, I would guess. In his confirmation hearings, he also echoed the voice of the president in saying he needs to be tougher on Japan. Japan needs to spend more on defense. It needs to spend more on supporting the United States. And this status of forces agreement, it seems a little bit out of kilter. I think we need to do something about that. And this unbalanced trade situation and the deficit that Japan holds, we need to start addressing that. And I'm going to be tough on them. So that's out of the voice of the current candidate, or the what would you call him? He's not a candidate. He's the appointee of the president, and it looks like he will sail through. As you know, the foreign minister was in Canada for the Group of Seven this last week. He reiterated Japan's request to Secretary of State Marco Rubio that the United States should back off a little bit on the tariffs on the 25% on steel and aluminum and the reciprocal tariffs because we've got such a great relationship. And this follows just a week before METI minister went to Washington, D.C., similarly tasked with trying to negotiate with the Commerce Secretary on the reduction of these tariffs and to reduce those threats or the kind of the pallor that it is casting over U.S.-Japan trade relations. And it is actually very serious. I think for those of you in Tokyo, you know that the just the level of communications, the activity, the economic activity has taken a significant step down. You're not getting as many communications. The city is not as vibrant. There's not that excitement in that. I'm going to get into some of the reasons for that. But, you know, 2 chances to go to the United States to request, you know, a little bit of flexibility on these tariffs and the reciprocity that is coming down and not receiving any messages of encouragement there. So it is a little bit concerning. Maya, this last week was 14 years. I'm sure you remember it from the 3/11 triple disaster. You were here in Japan. I was here in Japan. 22,000 people lost their lives. 90% of them lost their lives due to drowning. I think a lot of people don't know that. 27,000 people are still displaced as a result of that. Fukushima, Iwate, the area up towards Tohoku is still reeling from that. The young women in particular are fleeing. They have been fleeing ever since that disaster. They're coming to the bigger cities. They're looking for jobs and going to schools and not coming back. And of course, that means that the young men are also similarly less encouraged to go there. So there is a tremendous hollowing out. You'll remember that the prime minister said one of his main objectives in becoming prime minister is rural revitalization. And it's not just the Tohoku region, but it does include the Tohoku region, which requires and really deserves more government intervention and more government money. There's been some movement with regard to transporting the contaminated topsoil throughout other regions of Japan, not just keeping it in Tohoku. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of action going on there, but it is just a huge issue. And on I think it was Monday, with the 14th anniversary, at 2:46, everybody remembers where they were on that day. And this whole week has been full of stories, people contributing stories to the newspaper and on social media about what exactly they were doing and what they went through. So it was a really epical challenge and a change for Japan that we're still kind of going through. Moving on to another issue, Rengo is the affiliated union for labor unions across the country. They received, and we're going through this Shunto exercise. The fiscal year starts on April 1st. Everybody knows that. So a lot of contracts are issued. So the negotiations are at a fever pitch now. Rengo was able to extract concessions from management, from the employers on wage increases. They received overall 5.46% raise in salaries going forward from in 2025. So that's huge. That's the largest increase since 1991. That's 34 years. There has never been this much of an increase. Last year was the first record breaking, and they accepted, what was it, 5.28% a raise and increase. Toyota increased monthly salaries by 10,000 yen per month and have acknowledged a 7.5 month bonus period annually. So they're trying to keep the workers encouraged and enthusiastic, but inflation just continues to eat at that, and that's why they have to increase it so much just to keep on top of things. And like I said, tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. It's a big deal for 70 million people who say they have Irish heritage. and a lot of people who don't, but they all pretend like they do. It's like, joining the the Greek Chamber of Commerce, Maya. Everybody's Greek at a certain time of their life. So a lot of people like to become Irish, and it's a big day for the Irish embassy here. They're completing their Irish house. There's a visit by the Minister of State for disabled. Hildegard Naughton is visiting here. She'll be joining the Ambassador Cole. They're having a huge Irish parade in Omotesando, and it's the largest Irish parade in Asia. It's the longest serving, and so I think a lot of people will be participating in that. It's something that's really adds the flavor of Japan. And then finally, I think this is also not purely politics, as the Irish festival is not purely politics. It does have an impact on that. But the defending National Baseball Association champions, the Los Angeles Dodgers, will be playing in a game this Tuesday against the Chicago Cubs. They're opening the season here in Tokyo in the Tokyo Dome. That's really incredible because, of course, everybody in the world knows probably the greatest baseball player alive ever in history, Shohei Ohtani, plays on the Dodgers, and he will be playing in the Tokyo Dome to his home country. Tokyo Dome has been sold out for ever since this idea came up. But can you imagine how much thought and how much Dentsu energy was put into bringing this opening game to Tokyo and having both teams here for probably about a week? They're going to play 4 exhibition games and 2 playoff games. So it's a pretty big deal. It's not exactly politics, but I think it's something that really impacts, the U.S.-Japan relationship, and also it helps Japan's national sport, baseball, here. But moving on to the other issues, Maya, I'll wait for that after you give a plug to our wonderful sponsors. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you. And yes, I want to say thank you, a big thank you to Kanchu, the first of our sponsors, or as they are also known, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku. They are based in Yokohama, and they do a lot of work there, buying and selling real estate investment, and property management. You can connect with them by connecting with James Howell. You can see his picture here, but you probably already know him from LinkedIn. He is active there, and he can talk with you either in English or Japanese. His colleagues are Japanese, but they do work with foreigners here in Japan, and you do not have to worry about any language barriers there. So if you have any projects in mind in these fields, please reach out to James and connect with him and work with them. So thanks a lot for this. And Timothy, once again, it is over to you.
Thank you very much, Maya. And once again, thank you, everybody, for joining us. The Prime Minister of Japan, Shigeru Ishiba, has had probably his toughest week since taking office, and he has just been pummeled this way and that way. The budget kind of passed the lower house, but not on schedule. It was supposed to pass on Sunday, the 2nd, March 2nd. It didn't pass. It eventually was kicked up to the upper house on the 5th. But even as it went up to the upper house, different changes were being suggested. And the prime minister this last week had to acquiesce and admit that changes to the submitted budget needed to be undertaken. It was a really torturous process. The budget, so basically laws that go through the upper house, they can start in the upper house, they can start in the lower house. They go from one house, they pass that, and they go to the next house. And once it passes that one, it becomes law. With the budget exclusively, it must start in the lower house, and then it goes to the upper house. And the upper house has 30 days to consider it, and it must be considered and passed by the upper house or by the end of March every year. This year, it looks like it passed the lower house, but it went to the upper house, and there have been 2 amendments. So it's the first time for the budget to go from the lower house to the upper house and suffer an amendment. And this week it went through its 2nd amendment. So this has never happened. This is somewhat a reason or a cause of the LDP having basically a minority government. They lacked 13 votes. They were able to cozy up. Can you turn your mic off, please, Maya?
Oh, yes, sure.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Breathing. Thank you. I'm going to hear about that later. The budget typically, because the LDP has been in power for so long, at least for the last 20 years, they've never had to negotiate. And this time they must negotiate. They finally were able to negotiate with Isshin no Kai. They got not only the 13 votes, but all of the members of Isshin no Kai, 38 members, voted to support the LDP submitted budget. And that passed the lower house. They had a convention there on March 5th. And immediately it began to undergo changes. So the upper house, the LDP actually has a bit of a majority in the upper house. It's got, I think, 18 additional members. It's got a cushion there with its coalition partner, Komeito, I think, as most people know. So in the lower house, they're weak. In the upper house, they're strong. But even then, there are members in the LDP and in Komeito who are opposed to some of the amendments that are contained within the bill. And the first one that raised so much ire this last week was to raise the level of co-payments for medical care. So that means people who are undergoing serious medical care, and they need to pay for everything above a certain amount. In the Ishiba provided budget, that number went up. So they have to spend more money before the government kicks in. And that received a lot of pushback from the opposition parties and also from within the LDP. So the prime minister backed down this last week, and he said, okay, we'll keep the co-payments at the rate that it is now. We're not going to raise it up because, as we all know, the Japanese government is suffering from the amount of revenue it's generating compared to the amount of money that it's spending in this new budget as well. So this happened this week on Tuesday. Monday, Tuesday was very tough. The prime minister actually had to back down and say he would keep with the budget. But even at that point of time, there were voices within the LDP. An upper house member said, this prime minister, he really should resign. It's not quite unheard of, but at this particular point in time, for a member of the upper house to criticize the prime minister as elections are looming is a huge signal. So this comment was made. It got lots of coverage. So it's a bit of a signal that perhaps it's okay now to criticize the prime minister. An individual like that, not totally, he's been in the upper house for 3 terms. That's 6, 12, 18 years he's been there. He's going up for re-election. And for him to say that is something that he can't do all by himself. So he must have had instructions from the real powers within the LDP. And we assume that the real powers are Mr. Ishiba, Mr. Tadaaso, Mr. Motegi, and Mr. Kishida. But I think probably with Mr. Ishiba being just perceived as so weak and not really possessing leadership qualities, the leadership council is actually Kishida, Motegi, and Aso. And so this comment that was made earlier in the week had to have some sort of approval. So that indicates that really the knives are becoming a little bit more apparent in the background within the prime minister's own party. And, the prime minister just this last week, NHK, which is a darling of the government, the darling of the LDP, the prime minister appoints the chairman of the NHK. They came out with a poll that said 36%, only 36% of those polled support the prime minister and the current administration. So there are a lot of people that are very disappointed in what's going on, how things are being handled with the minority government and with the passage of the budget. You would have thought that maybe the prime minister, and he did last week, he got a little bit of an approval uptick, but it didn't last very long, and he's in the danger zone. 36% is the danger zone for any prime minister. And actually, more precariously, on Wednesday, it was revealed that the prime minister gave to 15 first-year rookie lawmakers in the LDP who had just won in this last election. He invited them to the prime minister's residence, and to each of them, he gave 100,000 yen vouchers for congratulations. This is really, yes, it smells. The prime minister, it was revealed he was called on the mat in the budget hearings to explain himself. And he said they were just vouchers. They were in, the 100,000 yen area. That's about, in US dollars, about 674 US dollars. And they were just vouchers so that they can use them to purchase things. Their family can use them. It was a personal gift from me as prime minister out of my own pocket to each of these first year members. And this really is a flashpoint for the opposition to attack him, and legitimately so. The prime minister said it's not against the law, but under the current environment where the LDP is suffering because of this kickback scandal, and all eyes are on, who did it and why is the LDP always embroiled in money and politics and big business and bribing people. This came at a very, very hard time for the prime minister. So not only the co-payments issue, but also this issue here, it just has a very bad smell. And not only the opposition, but there are factions within the LDP that really don't support the prime minister. In fact, they dislike him greatly. You will remember that not less than half a year ago, there were 9 people that wanted to be prime minister, and the 8 that were defeated by the prime minister because he was supported by Mr. Kishida, because he was supported by Mr. Motegi and Mr. Aso, they are beginning to raise their voices in a very efficient and particular way. This has happened on Thursday, Friday, and yesterday, and the voices are beginning to coalesce. And so it doesn't look good for this prime minister, and I'm going to go into why. The upper house election in this diet session ends on June 22nd, and then there is scheduled to be an election of 50% of the upper house. The upper house consists of 248 members. Half of that is 125, and they will go up for an election. 125 people for a national election. It doesn't seem like such a big deal, but with the LDP holding an 18 seat majority there, and with some of the people that are running from the LDP having been implicated in the kickback scandal, it is highly likely that the LDP could lose even 18 seats in this next election. And if that's the case, the opposition parties are all thinking, if we could defeat them in the upper house, why don't we just lobby or force a double election? That means we go for an election again. The lower house, all the members, the 700 members, 700 plus members of the lower house go up for election again, because we can have a repeat of what we did in October, the October surprise, where Ishin, they didn't win as robustly as they wanted to, but the Constitutional Democratic Party did, and the Democratic Party for the People grew 250%. They went from 7 to 28. So that was a huge victory, and people are licking their chops thinking, if there's blood in the water, we should go for that. So that is really something that is being considered. Many of the people who are now opposed to the prime minister are those who are up for election in the LDP that are saying, with this prime minister moving forward, if we go for elections, we're not going to win. It doesn't look good. And this voucher issue, it just smacks of cronyism. And even the prime minister himself said, in open session, well, it was just, to reward them and to thank them for all of their hard work. And I mean, gosh, it happened just as the budget was being passed from the lower house into the upper house. So it does really look pretty bad. As a consequence of the bill going through another revision, typically the lower house, there are 50 committee members in the budget committee in the lower house. They do their job and they pass their recommendation. They actually pass the bill and it goes to the upper house for 30 days of consideration. So after they do that, these 50 members get to take a break. They've done their job. They can't do that now because the upper house is considering amendments. Once again, the first time that this has happened, that the upper house is considering amendments, the lower house has to pass it again. So in fact, both committee chairs in the upper house and in the lower house had to meet this last week to consider how we're going to orchestrate the upper house passing it and then the lower house passing it again. Because typically what happens, the lower house passes it, it goes to the upper house. If the upper house doesn't pass it, it reverts back to the lower house passing it. You can't do that this time because there are amendments to the bill. So everything is under confusion. Everything is under, not confusion, it's just a new ball game because the LDP no longer calls all the shots. So with that, and in the context of the prime minister fumbling on the co-payment and also on this voucher, it looks like there might be a call for a change in at least leadership, if not a closing of the House. So this is a very pregnant issue, and there's more that's coming up next week. Please stay tuned. At the same time, you've got the Trump tariffs that look like they're going to be imposed on aluminum and steel. And then on April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs are going to be kicked in. Two state ministers have traveled to overseas, one to Washington, D.C. last week, and this week to Canada to appeal to the United States to back off a little bit. I mean, you backed off with Canada and Mexico. You gave them a month of a reprieve. So you're not going to impose those tariffs. We're even better friends than Mexico and Canada. So come on, give us a little bit of skin here. They didn't get that. So the fact that, Mr. George Glass going through his appointment or his confirmation as ambassador to Japan, mentioning, Japan is really not paying its fair share. It needs to spend more than 2% of its GDP. It needs to spend 3%. And at the same time that Japan is undergoing this kind of turmoil in the economy. I didn't mention it as I opened up with the yen rate, but the yen rate on on the close of business on Friday was 148.64. You'll remember this is strengthening now from earlier the last 3 months. Last week it was 148.02. So it's a little bit stronger last week. It's just a tad bit weaker this week, but it all comes as a consequence of what's going on with the United States and this fear on tariffs. So with regard to steel and aluminum, in the overall mix, steel exports from Japan to the United States only consist of about 1.4% of overall trade value. Aluminum is 0.1%. So it's not a big deal. This hit on the tariffs with aluminum and steel as it's being applied, I think globally by the Trump administration, doesn't have a huge impact. But the president has also said, even just recently as Tuesday of this last week, that automobiles from Europe, definitely they're going to get my attention. I'm going to tariff the hell out of them because they cheat us and they prevent us from selling our cars in Europe. That suggests that automobile trade from Japan to the United States could similarly be affected. and that once again, we talked earlier about the negative, the pallor that's overlaying the economy of Japan. If automobiles are almost 50% of the Japanese economy, automobiles, automobile parts, the export market, that sort of thing, all of the feeder companies that facilitate automobiles, that's a huge component of Japan's external trade and of their GDP. So if tariffs are imposed on automobiles, we don't know if they are or not, but we'll know it soon enough. If 25% tariff is applied to Japanese autos going to the United States, and once again, many Japanese automobiles are made in the United States. It's the export model, the export market. 25% tariffs is going to hit the automobile trade in parts and in automobiles about 40%. And that equates to about 1.8 trillion yen per year, which is about 12 billion US dollars per year that the Japanese economy would suffer. GDP would fall by about 0.33%, they have said, but the ripple effects to all of the feeder companies, to the products, to the materials that go into that could be pretty enormous. So the economy here is really kind of sitting in a little bit of on tenterhooks. The economy, in fact, the Bank of Japan produced its analysis of how the economy did in the last quarter of 2024. They projected that the economy would grow by 2.8%. And now the numbers have come in. It's March, so they've gone through that. They've been able to analyze and report, and the numbers came in far lower. The economy only grew by 2.2%. And as a consequence of that, many of the spending habits and how inventories are calculated, the consumption is far weaker than it was originally predicted to be. So it's not a good time to be prime minister. It's not a good time to be in negotiations with your largest trade partner. But that's the situation that we're in now. The yen weakened this week. It was, in fact, at 146, a strong showing. But upon the release of the revised numbers for the last quarter of 2024, it fell to the range that it is now, 148. It's still better than it was over the last couple of weeks. But this week is the week for the Bank of Japan to have their weekly meeting. It'll be on Wednesday and Thursday. So people are looking very carefully at how they're going to perhaps revise interest rates, what they're going to do about this story that they said that there is moderate economic recovery in Japan. And they can't say that now. I think the best thing that they can say is market recovery has been flat over the last quarter. And that's not good news. It doesn't send a very strong signal. So January household spending fell to 0.8%, and it was supposed to be 3.7 as predicted several months ago. Household spending as we approach spring will be in 3.7% increase from the time last year, and the economy is going to be going. It wasn't 3.7%. It turned out to be 0.8%. So that somebody's got to suffer for that, and I think the economy here can't really go through a very big shock. In other news, there are two issues that are undergoing diet consideration. One is the surname law, so that couples that get married, the female spouse can elect to keep her family name on the koseki. So it requires a huge revision to the current law. There are many people within the LDP who are opposed to that, the conservative wing. And on the more progressive wing of the LDP, they want to accommodate this. The population wants it. More than half of the population are in support of that, but the conservative wing says we should stick with our culture and the koseki system, and there's so much underpinning that. To change that is going to cause lots of disruption. So there's a fight inside the LDP and also with Komeito as well, we've discussed this before, that the relationship between LDP and Komeito is a little bit tender right now. And as we approach the upper house election, it is possible, under the current situation, under Mr. Ishiba's leadership, that the Komeito party could decide, they've kind of had enough of this scandal-tainted LDP affiliation, depending on who you're talking to, scandal-tainted or not. So it is possible that there is a change in leadership. And if there's a change in leadership, it needs to be quicker rather than later. That means that as we approach the closing of this diet session and then the triggering of the upper house, if you're going to have a change in leadership close to that point in time, you don't have enough preparation to the population about, here's our leadership and we've just suffered from turmoil and we want you to vote for us and we're trying to fix this thing. It's far better to have that turmoil early and then elect a strong prime minister and then promote the candidates, have the election scheme planned out, have things more stable. It's not stable right now, and everybody knows that. And so there are many voices that say we need to change out, we need to switch this out. And I think that that scenario is quite likely. There are three ways it could happen, and it could happen quickly. The budget needs to pass. We need to get through March 1st. We need to get through this month first, so that the budget passes on April 1st, or it passes on March 31st, and on April 1st, it has become law. And now the gloves come off, and there's probably going to be some turmoil there. There are three ways it could happen. The prime minister could say, look, I've tried my best. I don't think that I can really carry the ball forward. I don't think under my leadership, the LDP will survive in the upper house election. So I'm going to resign and let somebody else come in. The second way is that the LDP, the members of the LDP, gather within the LDP headquarters up on the 8th floor, and everybody gets together and they talk about it, and they say, look, these are the three people that we think are viable as a replacement for the prime minister. And I think everybody on this show knows the 3 or 4 people that we would be talking about, but it is bubbling. It's really bubbling a lot now. To elect somebody to replace the prime minister, and basically the LDP would fire the prime minister as the leader of the LDP, and then there would be a vote to replace him within the Diet, which requires both houses to have that vote. Could be a lot of turmoil, but it could be done in a very brief period of time. The third method of doing that is for the opposition party to coalesce and say, we don't trust this guy, we don't like him, we don't want him to be prime minister. And so we have issued a no confidence motion, and everybody gets to vote. And it is possible, since you've got this conservative wing and the progressive wing within the LDP, and you've got a lot of people who are just fed up with this prime minister. They want to change. They don't like what he's done. They don't like that he's had so lackluster leadership that the budget is going through 2 amendments, or has gone through 2 amendments. The change will happen once it passes. It will pass this month and become law. But it's like watching, sausage being made. It's just a very difficult, disgusting process that requires a lot of negotiation, and the LDP is not in a position. It's not only not in a position, but it doesn't have that muscle memory of how to negotiate with opposition parties. It hasn't had to do that in 19 years. So it is fumbling along a little bit. And with the leadership of Mr. Ishiba, which is not that sterling, I think one could say, that the signs are not good for a robust LDP showing. Remember also that Tokyo elections, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government will have elections just prior to the closing down of the Diet. And that will be a barometer of how things are going. So a lot of energy is being spent on the candidates for the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, because people will read that and they'll say, this is the LDP is kind of on the downswing on the local area. And so similarly in the national area, it's going to be similar. And it pretty much is. Tokyo is such a huge component of the overall economy and overall politics. I mean, 10% of the entire nation lives in Tokyo, and most of the economy is driven out of Tokyo. So what happens in Tokyo really dictates what happens through the rest of Japan. So this is also something that we'll be keeping a close eye on. That's about it there. I'm sure there are other issues that everybody wants to talk about, some issues that I might have misstated, and I apologize for that, but I'm sure you will point them out to me. And I'll just turn it back over to the Q&A period, Maya, and we'll kick it off for the rest of this briefing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for walking us through all these ins and outs and, the back streets of what happened last week in Japanese politics. And once again, before we continue with the questions and answers, I want to say thank you to our other sponsor. In addition to Kanchu.com, we have, we've got Houze, or as they are also known, Houze Inc. You will find them online at houze.co.jp or webmaster at houze.co.jp. They do custom home design and construction, commercial building construction as well. You can also connect with Hana Urushizawa Howell, who represents them. She speaks beautiful English, Japanese as well. So the language barrier is not going to be a problem there. Please, if you have any such projects coming your way, think of them and connect with them. We have worked with them, and that's why we are very, very pleased to be able to represent them here and promote them here. And now we are moving on to the Q&A session. Timothy, we started with a question even before we opened the live stream this morning. The question came from Hiroko-san. She might not be able, she's probably not with us now because she's got other things to do, but she left the question anyway, so I'm going to read it out to you. Please share your comments and thoughts on it after I finish. So she says, good morning, PM Ishiba giving 100,000 yen gift vouchers to the 15 LDP rookies. How does this impact the 2025 budget and Ishin no Kai? Does this infringe the political fund control law? I think that you touched upon this, but still, if you can answer this specific question, please do.
Okay, so this is just a personal issue with the Prime Minister. He paid the, what is it, 100,000 yen? Is that Jumayan? 100,000 yen?
100 yen, 100,000.
Out of his own pocket. So it doesn't come from the budget. It has no relationship to the government. That's what he says. It has no relationship to the government. And I think that that's accurate. He took it out of his own pocket. But it was just unwise for him to do that. In the past, this sort of thing wouldn't happen. Number one, the Prime Minister has, in the Prime Minister's residence, about 500 people who are supporting him and guiding him. In the past, the Prime Minister would be probably the leader of an individual faction. And the faction, inside the faction, they would determine that. They would be suggesting this. They would be coaching the Prime Minister to keep him out of trouble. And that didn't happen this time. I think the Prime Minister just thought it's a good idea, and I want to reward these people. They're rookies. So just bringing them closer to me and making them a little bit more comfortable in dealing with me is not a bad idea. It's a good strategy, and it doesn't violate any laws. But that doesn't need to be the case in the lower house, in the upper house with the opposition. You did the wrong thing. You are trying to bribe these people to make them closer to you. No, it was just a personal gift because they really helped a lot, and them and their families. And it's not cash. It's kind of a voucher so they can get things from the store, and it's not really a bribe. But people are really up in arms about that. And even within the LDP, they're saying you stepped over the line. Even if it's legal, you shouldn't have done it. It doesn't look legitimate. You're an idiot for doing that at this particular point in time. So you have to resign and take responsibility for that.
Well, I believe and he already has, let's say, critiques, right, within his own party. So doing doing that, just handing over the vouchers probably has upset those critics even further.
Well,
think that,
go ahead.
no, I think that the question was also about the deliberations of the budget 2025. Is what he did also going to impact these discussions? And because the budget, well, it has not been passed yet, right? So do you think that there will be some impact, some more delay there?
Oh, absolutely. There already is delay.
Yeah.
The budget hearings have already delayed. These 50 people from the lower house, they still have to stay in committee. Not all of them are LDP. Less than 50% of them are LDP. They're also the opposition parties, but they have to stay in, and they're meeting at the same time that the upper house budget committee is meeting. So it gives them lots of opportunity to have controversy, to have press release, to talk to the press about why what the prime minister is proposing in the budget deliberations is not good. And by the way, this voucher that he gave, right, this story just continues to go forward and more and more. The other thing, and just to indicate that, yeah, it's probably not kosher, it wasn't a good idea, everybody who received those vouchers returned them almost immediately. Once this thing became a little bit more public, when they went to the prime minister's official residence, they had dinner, they received the vouchers from the office of the prime minister, and the story came out. I think this was on March 5th that dinner party was, and then the story began to trickle out, and before this last week, they had already returned the money that they had received, or they reported to have returned that. So that indicates if it was all above board and everything was okay, then why return it? But unanimously, they have returned it. So that indicates that, yeah, it was probably not the wisest thing to do.
Right. Okay, so thank you for commenting on this as well. There is a comment actually which was left on YouTube last week or this past week, and I also want to read it out to you.
Okay.
So it is from Nicholas Hughes, and to everybody listening to us, yes, I'm sorry for this voice I have this morning. I think that next week it will be much better. So here we've got, the question is, the whole Western Bloc, this is about the external relations, okay, and East Europe to Canada, and now we're moving a little bit into geopolitics here. So Nicholas writes, the whole Western Bloc is being reordered and changed from East Europe to Canada to Japan. I think it's fair to say the states best able to adapt to that change will probably do the best out of it. So I wonder if Timothy thinks there is an existing political leader able to take change, or is it a case of come the moment, come the man, and some currently unknown will rise up. If the latter, in the context of the Japanese political system, what would that look like?
That's a really astute question. The people who are most likely to challenge the current prime minister, and I think a challenge is in the works, actually, are individuals we already know about. Sanai Takaichi, Takayuki, what's his last name? Sorry. Takahashi.
Kobayashi. Sorry.
Kobayashi, yes. Who was a very serious contender in the presidential election. You've still got Konotaro. You've got a couple of others. Mr. Motegi looks very strong and has remained in the leadership pod with Mr. Aso and Mr. Kishida. So, yes, I think the next challenge needs to be somebody who is at least very versatile in U.S.-Japan relations and could be somebody to talk with the president of the United States. But I think we've actually passed that. I think we're now moving in towards the election, and it's mostly domestic. How are we going to get the LDP to succeed in maintaining their majority in the upper house? But as we all know, even if they maintain the majority in the upper house, they still don't have a majority in the lower house. It's going to continue to be like this. And they don't like that. They need to have more stability. And so I think depending on the dynamics that come up over the next two months, the election will be in 3 months. The expo starts in less than 2 months. It's in mid-April. It's almost in a month. The expo starts, and that has a big impact on political dynamics too. So yes, who is going to step forward? I think it's the jockeying has already occurred. We already know who is having their own benkyokais. They're launching them. They're standing up for either their opposition to the surname vote or the political donations. The battle lines have already been drawn, but it's going to happen very quickly, I think. And if it's going to happen, it needs to happen quickly. If Mr. Ishiba is able to survive for maybe 5 or 6 weeks, then they'll probably stick with him up until the election, because it's too close to the election to have that much turmoil.
Right.
But yes, the individuals who rise up and eventually have a successful challenge, or maybe it's a successful challenger, but the challenge itself is unsuccessful. But that phase of turmoil needs to happen and be finished very quickly.
Right. And I think that Japan also needs, and the LDP, of course, if they want to stay in power and to be able to be, or to call the shots, right? So they need a leader who can take them through another lower house election and secure majority there. But among the candidates that you mentioned, as you said, there were 9 candidates last year for the presidency of the LDP, and of course from there for the prime ministerialship. But are there any candidates who can actually secure that majority among those people? That's also another big question, right? Because all the 9 people, most of them are well known in the country. All of them are well known within the LDP too. But still, the question is, do they have the credentials to secure that majority in an eventual election, lower house election?
In every poll that's been taken, the Japanese in large numbers, maybe 30%, if given the option of changing the leader from Mr. Abe to somebody else, or Mr. Kishida to somebody else, or Mr. Suga or whatever, more than 30% of the people say, well, there's nobody else that can do what he's doing. We should stick with him. There's nobody else around. And that's never the case. And we had the same argument when Mr. Ishiba came as the top contender for prime minister. The reason why he won was because he was able to form a coalition of the big shots, the fat cats, the Mr. Aso, Mr. Kishida, Mr. Nowadays Mr. Motegi, who is really beginning to show his mettle. And I think he is a contender that, he is a tough guy. He was trade ambassador, trade minister. He got his MBA in the United States. He is a sharp cookie. I really like him. I think Mr. Kishida would make a second go at it to repeat what Mr. Abe once did, and thereby becoming, a long-serving Japanese prime minister. Mr. Aso is definitely not going to run. He's just he's a kingmaker, but he's I think he's 82 or 83 years old. So he's not going to run, but he's going to be definitely involved in picking who will be that contender. But we're talking now as if it's actually happening. We need a couple more days to pretty much crystallize that. But my prediction is that the knives are out and it's not looking very good. And all the prime minister needs is another couple of serious challenges, and it's going to be over. There are people that are just really looking for blood, and it's not just the opposition; it's also within the LDP. And finally, before I close this up, we're talking about a leadership within the LDP who's going to survive and take over. We can't discount that the opposition parties come together and are able to settle on a certain candidate to topple the LDP. So that's been one of the drives of the opposition party is to return to power. And the last time they did that, Mr. Noda, who is currently the president of the Constitutional Democratic Party, became prime minister. So it is a possibility that they could coalesce under him. The leader of Isshin no Kai is the governor of Osaka. The leader of the Democratic Party for the People, Mr. Tamaki, he is a man on a mission, and I think he would probably not take kindly to be in a number 2 position. So it is a fraught challenge.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And we've got another comment on LinkedIn from Manabe-san. Manabe-san talks about a specific issue. It is about the Mogami type frigate Nishiro, which is visiting Australia at the moment. What does this mean? What does the visit mean at this point of time? If you can comment.
Yeah, please. That's a great. So many people criticize the meeting between Ishiba and Trump, and Mr. Trump saying, you need to pay more, you need to purchase more defense equipment, you need to do more of this and that. And in fact, not all of those voices were coming from President Trump. Some of those voices were coming from Mr. Ishiba himself. Mm-hmm. Japan desperately needs to have another industry to supplement the economy here. It's got automobiles, and they focused on automobiles, and automobiles, generates almost 50% of the Japanese economy. And internally, at least, public consumption, personal consumption generates, more than 50% of the GDP. So it's a very difficult mix. And I think the LDP certainly from its inception has always wanted to change Article 9 so that Japan can produce and maintain defense and offense capabilities. And it can't. It needs to rely on the United States. So there are signals that there is a defense industry that's beginning to grow here. But if Japan could marry its technical prowess with its ability for manufacturing and focused on munitions and armament and export of offensive weaponry, that would, they could do the same thing with cars and dominate the world market in terms of weaponry. So the fact that this destroyer is traveling to Australia now, it's kind of a sales pitch. Japan produces these ships. It is attempting to showcase them and sell them. They tried that with submarines. They almost won with submarines. France came in about 12 years ago and scooped that up and was able to sell the submarines to Australia. But Japan wants to get back into that business, and it requires not only a viable market opportunity, but it also requires a change in Article 9, which the LDP is dedicated to. This prime minister will not be able to pull that through, but under different leadership and under different scenario, if you have some sort of a kinetic action and the Japanese population is fearful and excited about the situation that they're in, and the United States is not going to support them, and the United States says, please pay us more money because we're providing the nuclear umbrella, and the Japanese are saying, well, we should change Article 9 and not have to rely so much on the United States. That scenario is not so far-fetched.
I see. Well, thank you for the comments. And right, so just going back to the previous topic that was brought up by Hiroko-san.
Hiroko, okay.
Yes, she says, talks about many Japanese people were upset with what PM Ishiba did, and they dropped a comment to indicate their indignation on X. And yes, thank you, Hiroko-san, for letting us know. And I believe that, just the pure ease with which PM Ishiba handed out those vouchers of 100,000 yen, I can imagine that for an ordinary person, it's still a huge amount of money to be handed out so easily, right? Probably politicians do not really have that much difficulty dealing with those amounts, but if you think about the ordinary citizens in Japan, then I can see why so many people were really upset about what he did there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in US dollars, it's $670 times 15. Yeah. The prime minister has that kind of disposable income. How about that? And why did he choose these 15? And yeah, it raises too many issues. It's not a good time.
No, it isn't. Especially if you want to have the support of your voters and, even other people. Well, okay. So, Timothy, I think, okay, we've got a comment from Patricia here. Patricia, good morning. Thank you for tuning in. She says, pity that the Japanese government wants to revive its income for military. I cannot find another industry not bent on murdering people. Cannot they find, I believe, cannot
Yeah.
they find another industry not bent on murdering people in other countries? Patricia, I cannot tell you how much I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because it pains me every time I hear about, the willingness among in political circles to develop the military industrial complex here in Japan, because once you have that complex, there will be that urge to sell the weapons and also to continue producing and selling them. And it also means death, it means murder. So I entirely agree with you. So another question from Patricia. How about giving everyone living in Japan a 100,000 yen handout? That will help the economy, right? Well, right. Maybe, I have no idea, but things are. Patricia, if you allow me, and Timothy, if you allow me to share my thoughts here, I believe it would be much better to, instead of handing out cash to people, just to help people who have an idea to build a business, help them do that. Basically, teach them how to develop that business and work on it. So that's my personal opinion. I believe that for many others, probably, receiving that cash as a handout is a better option. But if you really want to prep up the economy, just, make people or help people develop their ideas into what's, you know, revenue generating businesses. So, Timothy, I don't know what your thoughts on this are. And
Sure.
thank you for
Thanks.
letting me share mine.
Yeah. So Japan needs a new industry, and it's not like they haven't tried. So we will all know that Japan was just dominant in televisions and computers and Sony Walkman and that sort of thing, and they outsourced it. They pushed it out to Southeast Asia countries to do the manufacturing there, and they thought the high brain power would be kept here in Japan. And what we now know is that manufacturing needs to be internal. That's what Donald Trump has determined, that we want manufacturing back in, and that generates more flow of intellect and more patents, more higher thought, more innovation. And the Japanese are trying to come back to those roots. So they've tried it. They tried it with semiconductors, not very successful, but we've got Kumamoto and we've got Hokkaido. So there's an attempt there. But what they need is some big ticket item. And it right now, I mean, that's a long lead time. That's maybe a 20-year lead time, maybe 15 more years before Rapidus really starts coming up, and Kumamoto as well. I mean, they're in production for small scales right now, but before they're up really full scale, it's going to be another 10 years at least. They also tried with rockets and delivery, and JAXA has always been very prominent in disclosing what their launches are and some of the failures that they've had, and they haven't just really been able to do that. So that one's kind of off. They tried with airplanes, a passenger jet, or maybe seaplanes. Japan used to lead the world in seaplanes, the planes that have the pontoons on the wheels. They can be either landed on the sea or lakes or rivers, or they can be landed on ground. and they attempted that too, but the global market for seaplanes was just not that, it's not that robust. Weapons, though, people want weapons, and they pay the top dollar for that. And then if you have something that beats somebody else's weapon, you've got a market share there, and probably the Japanese have confidence in being able to achieve that, and that's good money. That's high profit on that. So it is a very lucrative and attractive and alluring market. But the Japanese, the market is not good now. The spending by consumers is down. The yen is volatile at best, and you've got Japan's number one trading partner saying, you need to pay more, you need to do more, you need 3% of your GDP maybe going forward, but it might be 4% because you're in a very a dangerous area, and we're not supporting and providing you all of the arms that we used to in the past, so you have to pay up more. Where are they going to do that? It's like giving people money. Where does that money come from? Are you going to print it out? The Japanese economy just can't suffer that, and it's just a very difficult challenge.
It is a very difficult challenge, and I agree with Diana Green here that we still need more imagination.
Yeah.
Instead of going into the obvious, and of course the obvious is, as you said, that developing that industry is the shortcut, I believe, and the easiest way to go. Probably more imagination is necessary to come up with something else that does not kill people.
Yeah.
And so, and okay, we've got also Yuka has joined us. Yuka, long time no see, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope all is good with you. So Yuka has a simple question. The question is, does Mr. Ishiba have any good advisors so that he will not gift vouchers? So who could advise him not to do that?
If he asked and if he listened, right? But we all know he's I don't know, kind of arrogant. He doesn't have much patience for people of lower quality, of lower intellect, and that includes just about everybody. So he is difficult to deal with. When you see him on television, he speaks very slowly so everyone can understand what he's talking about, right? But I think on a normal basis, his mind is very sharp. He's a brilliant guy, but I think it's very difficult to work with him. But I've heard that about Mr. Motegi as well. So it's not necessarily a criticism, but sometimes you get ahead of yourself. And with the faction system kind of gone now, and your close advisors, probably the close advisors are the people that you put in cabinet positions. They're maxed out. They're very busy too, but it's probably this internal cadre, his number one secretary, the prime minister's secretary. There are a couple of people that are very close to him. Mr. Hayashi is from the Kishida faction. He is his chief cabinet secretary. I guess he gives him advice and kind of stamps approval on a lot of things that the prime minister does, but sometimes it's just a house party. And I thought that I would do this. I didn't really ask anybody because I already checked, and it's legal, and I think it'll make people like me a lot more. Who knows?
Right. Yeah. And
what a great question.
It is a great question indeed. And we've got something that I really love from Diana again. The world could learn from Japan's compassion, respect, and mindset. Humanity is required. That weapon mindset is destructive. Yes, I agree with you. And I believe that more women would agree with me than men. So please forgive me. I'm not trying to be sexist, but this is the nature we are born into. And also from Hiroaki, one more comment about the frigate visiting Australia now. Hiroaki says, just a moment, Australia will buy the stealth frigate tech from Japan, as AUKUS might not be functioning under Trump at the moment. So, this is certainly something that might happen. We are going to watch this and also report on the developments there. Yes. Well, go ahead.
One other point, and this frigate is packed with technology. And I didn't know that a purchase order has been issued from Australia. but it's happening at the same time that the Chinese are beginning to send their surveillance ships circling Australia and New Zealand. They're making rounds now. They're not no longer just in the Japan Sea and Taiwan and Okinawa and, you know, circling the archipelago. They've kind of broadened out now, and they're doing that to Australia as well. So there's a lot of dynamism going on here. And yes, for the Australians, they have a shipbuilding industry, but with regard to something of this caliber, yeah, it's the Japanese, it's the Koreans, to a lesser degree, the Americans, and the French are still very much into that sort of production. But yeah, I'll keep an eye on that. And if in fact the sale was made and it includes, you know, several frigates and a fleet, I'll report on it next week.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And one more comment before we close for today. So from Konjo Tora on YouTube is, well, a recommendation to the government, reduce corporate taxes to help the economy. Yes, well, I think that we all would agree on that, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, there are so many ideas to reduce costs so people have a better life, but the Japanese economy, the budget needs, it's borrowing 50% of the money to pay for the budget. So, for example, these co-payments for insurance, let's raise the amount of money that they have to pay before the government kicks in. It was a small amount. It was, but it impacts, you know, critically ill people. And in the diet hearings, people were wagging their finger at the prime minister, saying, "People will die because of your decision to raise that level that they have to pay. They're not going to be able to pay it, and they won't get the treatment, and therefore they'll die. So you need to change your mind." He changed his mind. But even that amount, he thought he could squeeze it in. It helps the budget a little bit. And so maybe they're not borrowing 50%, maybe they're only borrowing 49%, but the Japanese economy is already underwater in just paying for these things. So they have to sell, you know, the Japanese bonds and, 30-year bonds in order to pay for that. So right. It's a delicate thing. And, you know, reducing, for example, the consumption tax, which is now 10%, let's reduce it to 8%. That will have an impact. They can't even consider that as well.
Right. Okay. So thank you very much indeed. I apologize for this again. I will be much better next week, I believe. And that's all for the moment. Sorry. And a shout out to our sponsors as well. Be with us next week again. We'll see.
You can do it, Maya.